Hey guys, Scott here with my first impressions of Pinhead, and he is definitely underwhelming at the current moment. He's not a good killer, really, at all. He draws a lot of comparisons to a couple of different killers. Namely, his gameplay is, at least around short loops, is like Clown, where he throws chains into you. Well, he throws a portal, and then from the portal, you have to aim a chain that shoots into you, and then that chain basically spawns other chains that slow you collectively for a pretty decent amount. The problem is, though, the time investment to put out a portal, or put out a gateway, as they're called, and then shoot out a chain, and then hit the chain on somebody. This is also a chain you can just easily miss, and then shoot out that chain, then switch back to yourself. You essentially get the same exact effect as a clown just throwing a bottle, because the slowdown ends up roughly being the same amount, because you can break these chains off, in my opinion, way too fast, and especially if there's some line of sight blocker. I remember the first time I got chased by Pinhead, I didn't even know you had to hold M1 to break the chains, but the chains broke so fast because I went behind a wall that I didn't even get to see the bar. Because he walked in front of it and broke one of his own chains. That's another issue. For some reason, Pinhead can break his own chains, which makes no sense. Because typically, when you shoot a chain out, the survivor is in front of you, which means probably the chain is going to be in between you and the survivor, which means you kind of, a lot of the time, have to walk into it. And you end up just cucking your own power by proceeding in the straightest line possible to get there at maximum, efficiency. So it ends up, just ruining that aspect of it. We tested the timing of it. It is actually a net loss in speed if they're just holding W and you hit them with their chains. Even if there's no walls, there's nothing to line of sight break. It is actually a net loss of speed overall to hit them with your power. Not even Clown suffers from that. So that's his chains are just too weak at the moment. Something very simple, just like not breaking out of line of sight would be great. Just lasting half a second longer per chain. Like, he's so close to being a pretty cool killer, because the actual mechanic of shooting out the gateway and then shooting basically a tentacle chain is pretty cool. Like, it's actually a really neat mechanic, and I want to see that be the star of the show, because that's the skill-based mechanic portion of it. But like I tested even in loops like this, hitting them with the actual chains, it just doesn't really do anything. It doesn't slow them down more than the time it takes you to get them into that slowdown position. Now, the only time he actually does become scary is his other feature, which is called Chains of Hate. Basically, you can see on the left side, or on your portraits, there's that little chain bar, or chain meter that's slowly growing over time. Once that meter gets full, then Chains of Hate starts, and this is basically a scenario where automatic chains start spawning while you're being chased. And that can be good, because now you're not losing distance. You're not sitting there shooting out a gateway, shooting the thing, switching back to yourself. It's just happening immediately. And in that regard, it's actually very useful, and this puts him above Clown when this power is up, for sure. The problem is survivors control when you have that power. And as we know, if you give that type of control to the survivors, we have the original Twins where people held Victor hostage. And we had original Plague where people would just hold her power hostage. Now they've rectified all these things by having an initial corrupt purge fountain, and now holding Victor forever is not actually a good idea. So they addressed all these things, but then they just repeated the exact same mistake with this killer, and they're going to have to do something again. So I don't know how they didn't learn from their past mistakes with that whole thing of holding their power hostage, basically, because his basic just chain power is pretty garbage at the current state. Now, if they buff that, totally different story. But at its current state, it's pretty fucking bad. The only thing that makes him scary is the passive Chains of Hate, which is controlled by that music box that people have to find. Now, when you hold the music box, you get the automatic chains on yourself, but everybody else's chains are disabled. I believe that's how it works. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've noticed that's how it works. So basically, the person that picks it up, as long as they're in a relatively safe area, they're really in no danger. They can kind of just hold it, and there's no huge downside to it, except that they can't really work on gens unimpeded. You can do it a little bit, because you can see where the chains are about to spawn and actually juke them, but they spawn like every 5 seconds, so you're going to be repairing gens at like half the speed. So it is detrimental in that regard. But other than that, like, you can really deny him the strongest aspect of his power pretty easily. And I always think giving survivors that much control over it is not the best call. Now, on the flip side, if they try to actually cleanse it for themselves as well, then Pinhead can teleport to them, and that is pretty useful, because he teleports fairly close to them. And that's nice, but until they have, I think, a bigger disadvantage for just having one person hold it, because they're just, like I said, they're just repeating the same mistake they did with Plague and the Twins. So as long as that's the case, just his chains power alone is not really scary enough to warrant him being even a decent killer. Because basically, Clown can do what he does better. He's essentially like a clown that can literally miss his bottle. Clown just throws shit at the floor. You can't really miss. But this killer can actually miss his slowdown. And if you do miss, oh my, it's even more of a distance loss. So he has nothing to do with survivors that hold W, because if you use your power, you actually lose time because the slowdown is so inefficient. And even in short loops, a lot of the time the loops are so short you could get a hit without even a power. Like, I very rarely in my entire time playing him felt like my power was the reason that I got a hit. Usually it's because they were at a very unsafe loop. They're at a TL wall where I'm just going to hit them anyway. So I never really felt like it was the power getting me hit until they had the passive Chains of Hate on. Then it was doing a lot of work. So overall, I think just a couple of tweaks, making it not necessarily break on, losing line of sight. Don't make Pinhead himself remove his own chains. I still think friendly survivors should be able to remove chains. That's fine. But he shouldn't break his own chains. And then just give some possible bigger penalty for holding onto the box and depriving the entire Chains of Hate feature of his power, because that's really where his strength comes in. The automatic slowdown is huge. But other than that, yeah, I think he needs a couple little changes, but I do really like the base mechanics of his power. I still think aiming this tentacle thing is pretty cool. There's chances to dodge it too. I don't know. It just seems like a pretty interesting mechanic, and I would love to see that expanded upon and made really the focus. I think his Chains of Hate should not be the focus, because that is the almost RNG automatic part. I'd rather them, expand on the skill-based part, and that is, actually aiming the tentacle. So that's the part that should get a lot of love and a lot of focus, so that should be stronger, and you don't even really have to touch the Chains of Hate part. Maybe you give some more, penalty for holding the music box for a long time, but I think that's what they should focus on more. So he definitely has potential. It's not like Trickster where it's just like, well, this is what he does, and you can tweak numbers and stuff, but he's still going to do the same thing, and it's very uneventful. I think he's got an interesting dynamic here. He just needs some numerical changes to really get him going. So he's got a lot more potential. I don't think he's not like DOA in design like Trickster was, but at his current state, he is not a very good killer, like at all. His slowdown is just not impactful enough. And I would just basically compare him to Clown. He's got a couple of things that he does better, but for the most part, I think I'd rather just play Clown. You don't even have to risk missing or anything like that. So that's it. First impressions. Going against him, I went against him for a couple hours as well. Now, I was going against like gold rank, whatever the hell rank 1 is now. Yeah, I was going against rank 1 players, but it doesn't really mean anything because no one really knows how to play him yet. But basically not a single time did I ever feel even remotely threatened by him. And one thing you can do as Survivor when you're going against this killer is hold M1 always, because if you're holding M1, you don't have to repress M1 if you get hit by a chain. So the millisecond, the frame a chain hits you, you're already starting to break it if you're just holding M1. So it's just really easy to get out of it, and I just never felt even remotely threatened, like at all, being chased by this killer. Except when he had his passive up, then it was a slog. But other than that, that's it, guys. I don't know if I'll be playing him more tomorrow. I think he needs some changes before I consider him even enjoyable to play. But that is it. I'm curious to hear what you guys think, and thanks for watching.